Now, I know perhaps some consternation from the stage manager. Is it okay that I've changed it? I just wanted boy, girl, boy, girl. I just thought that was a good mix. Is that okay? All right, great. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to see all of you. And just to let you know, you are going to have to work. I will expect some of you to ask questions from the audience. But we are here to talk about one of the most important topics facing our industry is what to do about network as a service. And you'll note that I think this is the second of how many different discussions of network as a service. I think it's 4 or 5 in this 2-day agenda here at FutureNet World. And I think it's an interesting fact that this is the case. And it probably reflects perhaps this strange dynamic that the industry has with network as a service. For those of you who've been in this business for a few years, I've been thinking very hard as an analyst. I work for a company called Omdia. We do a lot of research and consulting. I've been thinking very, very hard about how to describe our attitude as an industry to network as a service. And I think the dynamic is this. And I have to preface this by saying that if you're not British, this might be a bit difficult to explain. So you'll have to explain it to those who are British. We'll have to explain it to their colleagues and peers. And I would say that network as a service is very much like the hokey cokey. It's in, it's out, it's in, it's out, it's in, it's out, and we shake it all around. Shake it all about. And that is pretty much where we're at in the market. So today, we're going to talk about what it actually means and progress this conversation. So let me start by having the panel introduce what they do and how they're involved in this network as a service space, and then we'll drill down into the details. So let's start with Morgan.
Sure. I'm Morgan Stern. I'm the Vice President of Automation Strategy at Itential. In my role, I focus on service provider customers and working with them along with some of my colleagues and helping them understand how to map out the transition from where they are today to where they want to be. And lately that has been a lot about how do we start to take our capabilities and express them as consumable services that we can offer a network as a service, self-service, or other models.
Okay, Maria.
Hello, I'm Maria Rigu. I work at Colt Technology Services. I'm a Director of Transformation, and I work on use cases around network as a service and other transformative technologies that come our way.
Fantastic. And Mark?
So my name is Mark Dusen. I'm heading mobile networks and mobile products and services at Swisscom. And we're using NAS as a concept to separate the work of our teams, right? Agility is all about autonomous teams. And for that, you need technology to support that.
Right, and this brings us to perhaps one of the first issues, and it was brought up by Peter in his initial panel on networks as a service earlier on this morning, and that is there are different perceptions of what network as a service includes. It sounds like for you it's more an operational story. Is that right?
No, that's not true, but
okay.
It starts with the operations. If you don't use it, you cannot sell it, I would say, right?
Okay.
Sell what you do, or drink your own champagne. So yes, it helps us to separate, for example, the IP layer towards the platform layer of more the telco platforms, towards the services, and finally, and that would be then the selling part maybe, opening up all of that, all the stack up to external developers to create innovation on top. All of that is NAS. But if you don't do NAS internally, how do you make sure that you sell the right product externally?
Okay, and I think that's pretty much what you're saying, Morgan, is that right? Start internally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for us, a lot of the way that we've been communicating with teams is really thinking about network as a service as the consumption model that people have become accustomed to in the cloud world. And so as we have been working with them, part of it has been on how do I think about defining these components of a service that can be consumed in that way, right? And the transition, and we talked about this in the prep call, the transition has been the usual way of working within a lot of these environments is ticket-based. I do my task, I create a ticket. When I need something from somebody else, they get that. And what we've been doing is working with them to say, instead of taking the ticket model and trying to just kind of turn it into something digital, let's think about ways that we can avoid a lot of those pieces in the chain and make it so that all of that idle time in between ticket stops gets eliminated. So the more that I can express things as a service, as a consumable thing internally, means we can start to learn a lot of not only how to do it technically, but then also how to think about the pieces to expose.
All right, so your view is you're taking an operational view, and one of the first things you'll say about network as a service is stop the sort of Pontius Pilate approach to network operations. Is that right?
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
All right, so that's your approach to network as a service. Maria, what would be your definition approach?
My definition. So, I mean, there's a trend, right? Like everything is as a service these days, and if we haven't found something to do as a service, we will try. That's the next thing. I think with network as a service, the components play a big role. You know, Morgan, you mentioned it too, that you need to be able to understand how you offer that service. And in the past, we've waited for customers to tell us, and still do to an extent, what they want. But actually, you know, if you need to define it, you go down to component. You should really understand where the customers are going with all the trends. And then you'll be able to pull all the components together to offer, whether it's called network as a service or something else in 2 years' time, I don't know. But what it means is being able to read the trends, understand your customers, and be ready to offer what they will really like and need before they actually think they need it. Okay. Because by that time it will be late.
All right, so, and you would say you're on the journey, correct? And so are you, Mark? Correct?
Yes.
Okay, now let's see where the audience is. So how many of you would say you're currently using some level of implementation of network as a service? Put your hands up. Okay, so what do you reckon? I think that's barely a third. Can that be right? That's what I'm seeing, what I saw before. So barely a third of the audience has any experience of network as a service based on the way we sort of described it. Well, that sounds like there's work to be done. So what do we advise them to do next? So Morgan, you said start with your internal operations. Mark, what do you think?
I guess I wouldn't even be sure whether I would have raised my hand or not, right? It's a process. I think we haven't seen really an application or haven't seen someone who's done that completely right. But I take an example out of the
Oh, I never said do it right. I meant just start.
Therefore, who's doing it means it's a definition of what doing means, right?
Okay.
Whether you start it or whether you're already in place, have it in place. But taking an example, let's say packet core in mobile, right? So we operate that, and obviously it needs to be connected, so it's in our telco cloud, and we have dedicated IP addresses fixed even, so it's not managed, it's not as a service, it's planned, it's scribbled. Dedicated VLANs, and because that's so complex, we used to have network engineers in there doing all the firewalling, routing, whatever, right? The problem is that doesn't scale. That doesn't scale. So when we have an incident, typically we start to look and search, and because we feel secure, if we can manage all of it ourselves, that's easier, but that's a failure, right? It's not reality. But note the starting point is
the outcome you're trying to achieve.
Is to understand that the setup we've chosen out of the past, because we tend to manage boxes and therefore everything we need for that, we manage ourselves, is doomed for failure. That is the starting point, or has been the starting point on our side. So getting rid of our connectivity engineers within the team and handing it over to the ones doing connectivity as their profession, that's the starting point. And then, obviously, if you have that, you need a contract. And NAS is nothing else but technology helping you to create a contract.
Okay. Now, Morgan, do you agree with that? With what he's saying?
Yeah, I think one of the things that is a common conversation is just presenting an API doesn't mean you're offering network as a service, right? There are a lot of activities I can do through an API that would not constitute a service. Changing a configuration parameter isn't offering network as a service. I think the contract piece of it, in some cases has a commercial aspect, but more importantly, it's an operational aspect of saying, not only am I asking you to perform this or provide this as a service, but my expectation is that you're going to be managing it accordingly to whatever our agreement is.
All right, well, okay, we'll get to contracts in a minute. Let's go back to what are we trying to achieve? What outcomes are we trying to achieve with network as a service? Maria, your perspective from Colt. I mean, I'm sure there are various, but in your particular view.
Yeah, so we do offer a network as a service which is our on demand. I think
so that's the outward facing.
That's the outward facing. I think when we're looking at it, you have to understand first as a business the commercial aspects without going into them, and then the technical aspects that will require you to be ready to offer it. Because being ready to offer a service that is consumed on demand by your customers or anybody else, or even yourselves, you need to be able to have those components to support all the elements that you need. You need to be able to understand your capacity, where things can be offered at that level and at what threshold. And then you'll have to go into the commercials, understanding when your customers are ready to adapt and take something like this on. So there's a technical component of readiness based on the componentization that you need to dig deep and understand that you're ready to offer it. Because without it, it could fail.
So from Colt, yes, go on.
May I add something on the intent? I think we're all used to it in the technology domains, right? We're used to have infrastructure as a service for years or decades even now in the public cloud domain. And network as a service in its intent isn't different. The service is a different one, obviously, but it's really about not being bothered to think about things that are not my core business. And my core business operating a mobile network is not connectivity. I have a colleague whose core business that is, right? And that concept of dividing that and having technology means to support that, that is what network as a service is, at least in its internal aspect, and then going outwards, same concept.
Okay, so let's talk about that external aspect, network as a service. Is network as a service something that can only be delivered through a marketplace, and is it a marketplace that service providers should run, or something that they just become part of, somebody else's marketplace? Can we cover that, please? Because I think that's an important aspect. Maria, do you want to chip in a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Both. Marketplaces and platforms are coming up every day. You cannot completely discount it. You will have to be part of it and be able and ready through APIs, maybe additional technologies of the future, to offer that demand as it comes in for network as a service, for consumption of network. But as service providers, we also have to be ready to offer it individually, because participating in the marketplace has to be the right marketplace. It has to offer the right things for yourselves and the customers. But if you don't have that established capability yourselves first, it will be hard to gain that momentum on the marketplace. Okay. So both.
Morgan, what do you think about because a lot of times I've seen there's a lot of discussion of network as a service being synonymous with a marketplace type of model. Is that actually the case? Is it necessary?
Participation in a marketplace is going to be contingent on having a competitive product advantage and a differentiator. And I think that outside of connectivity, I think that's been the struggle, right, for the service providers. And this is where we've started to see folks moving towards more of a tech co model and saying, for me to offer something interesting, it may be some combination of capabilities that are in-house combined with external capabilities. Like, to me, I think that's the interesting space. But purely, like, it's going to require innovation, pretty significant innovation, to have a real open marketplace that's independent of where the service provider is.
Okay, so it doesn't sound like we're much further forward on that front, unless Mark has anything to contribute.
I would even say, yes, there will be all kinds of marketplaces maybe, or kind of offerings, but I think something we noticed as an industry, and we failed in multiple times as well, RCS as one example, is to combine forces and have a scalable offering towards the market. Who will be our external markets developers, right? And if they can do something for Swisscom in Switzerland, great. If they can do something for Europe, because the same logic applies to all kinds of our peers, the pie will grow, and therefore our share of the pie might be smaller, but in total it might be bigger. I think that's the inherent logic, right? It's about scale.
Okay. Let me shift to another topic that's related. Network as a service. Do we have a marketing problem with it? Is it a generic term, or does it mean one specific area? Does it mean multiple areas? Is it a service portfolio? Earlier we had a panel on slicing, which various people think are going to be marvelous. Others don't necessarily agree. Is slicing part of network as a service because it's on demand? I'm wondering, what do we include in network as a service? Because enterprises have their own view. How are you describing it?
I'll start. I don't think you can define it with thresholds. I think it's wrong for a technology that's still evolving to say this is what's in and this is what's out. I don't think that's the right thing, because you can really pigeonhole yourselves. I think what we need to think of network as a service is that it will demand an ecosystem of technologies and players to make it work. You'll need your internal APIs, you'll need external APIs, you'll need to understand how to componentize your own products and solutions. The customers will need a certain level of education and knowledge to be able to accept what's offered and actually utilize it. If you think back to the way the iPhone was introduced to the world, most people looked at the handset and didn't believe what it could do. And still to this day, I'm unearthing things my phone can do that I didn't know the day before. So you can't constrict your thinking approach around it, but you need to understand that you can't go at it alone, and the right ecosystem of players will really transcend it, or will actually kill it as a concept.
So what you're saying, I think, is that network as a service is a generic term that we can add various capabilities into as they become available. Is that right, Morgan?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we've got 4 sessions today and people are still trying to define it, like, certainly there's a definition problem, but I think more importantly, the commercial demand for self-service is clearly there. There's expectations that have been set, and if we kind of say, this is all really focused around a self-service model that includes all of the other pieces that it's going to need to be comparable. I think that's a useful way.
I mean, it's true that enterprises, and we've done work on this at Omdia, is about 9 out of 10 enterprises are willing to self-serve quite a few different types of digital services. Now, whether they're willing to self-serve a slice versus basic broadband is something questionable, and perhaps there are other things we need to address in terms of contracts and capabilities, right?
Yeah, specific to network slicing, I think there's a lot of technology pieces that need to mature quite a bit before we can really be even having a serious conversation about that.
So there are aspects that will stop us from developing network as a service. Yeah, there might be a bit of a branding issue. There's some operational issues. How difficult is getting over the legacy? What aspects of legacy stop people from an operational perspective moving forwards in network as a service? And I'd like to ask you that question, partly because Swisscom, from an external perspective, actually markets its capability in a range of on-demand services more effectively than quite a few service providers. You're fortunate in that capability, but I know that it's not been easy, right?
I think it's a constant change, and even as a service, and you mentioned it quite well, is nothing that is predefined and sticks, right? You could argue infrastructure as a service is now container as a service, isn't that infrastructure? So, and the main, let's say, change that needs to happen is, as I've said, it's all about autonomy. So you have autonomous domains that provide services for each other. And in the past, we didn't manage like that. Today, the packet core does utilize within its application logic connectivity configurations. So based on which VLAN is addressing him, it will operate differently, behave differently. So getting to a NAS concept means you separate that, right? And that's not technology. yes, it is technology of the past,
Well, you've given
but
us
it's a mindset.
You've given a
that you need to change.
technologist and engineer's answer, but I'm quite surprised no one's mentioned people yet.
That's what I'm just saying.
Sorry. Okay.
It's not
All
a
right.
technology question. It's a mindset. It's a culture and it's a skill set. Because it's a software-based skill set that we need more and more. But I think even skills are something you can train. But habits, beliefs, and feeling secure. I mean, having the ability to control all of my own is, although most likely a false security, but perceived as a security.
And new types of behavior. I think, Morgan, one thing you were talking about is we're still thinking of tickets when we need to think about other models,
That's right.
Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Like to tie to the people part, I think the more that we think in terms of composable services that aren't like bound one-to-one to a specific technology, like this is my broadband home access, but I start to think about real services. The challenge is, a lot of cases, to activate that transcends multiple teams within an organization. Right? I may need to talk to my packet core team, I may need to talk to my IP team, I may need to talk to my security team. So being able to offer that as a service means a tremendous leap in trust, because there will be handing over some of their responsibilities to some system or third party. And in a lot of cases, that is the kind of thing that holds up a lot of progress. So being able to have leadership that can overcome that becomes essential.
Given the types of capabilities and resources that could be made available, should we actually rename network as a service telco as a service? Would that be a better expression of, particularly if we are going to use APIs, to make that available to a wider audience? Or are we not ready for that yet? Are we limiting ourselves just to the network connectivity as a service piece? I'm just wondering.
I think it's not about branding or name, right? It's more about the principal concept, and you can have that as packet core as a service, packet service as a service, right? It's really the idea that a service isn't a box in its own, but is constructed out of different resources and other services. I mean, voice is consuming data, which is consuming connectivity, is consuming computing, is consuming whatever.
Okay.
And having that construction in mind is what network as a service, telco as a service, whatever you name it, is all about from my perspective. And,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, let me see if the audience wants to comment or disagree or ask a question. Let's give them the opportunity as they're all sitting here absorbing all of this insight, but let's just see if they have any thoughts. So put your hands up if anyone has a question or violently disagrees with what anybody has said so far.
I love Ryan.
Any hands? Okay, we've got one in the front. He's a troublemaker, but he usually has good questions. And do stand up and tell the audience who you are, Keith. If there is a microphone that could arrive, yep, he's here in the corner. Yep, this gentleman here. You stand up, if you don't mind.
I'm Keith Dyer, I'm from the Mobile Network. I don't know about a troublemaker, I feel more like the child that holds the class up because he hasn't understood. But in terms of, so Mark, a question for you about, you're talking about sort of, as I understand it, decomposing functions so that you can recompose them from a as a service point of view. What's the benefit of that for your customers? I can see that you get some operational upside, but in terms of how your customers will interact with you, what's the benefit there?
Thanks for the question. We, as a mobile network industry, right, we have this myth, that I call it, about 5 nines. And what did we do in the past in order to achieve that, which we, by the way, never did, is we build more and more redundancy, right? 2 systems, not enough, 3, 4, 5, and we failed and failed again. And decomposing that, because that is all blocks, decomposing that into services and saying, by the way, your responsibility is now connectivity, and please make sure that if it fails, you have a failover mechanism in place. And you as a packet core do the same, and you as voice do the same. The benefit for a customer is a higher resilience.
Right.
Based on failover mechanisms, fail fast and failover instead
So
of
operationally,
redundancy.
it's a much more secure and higher performing service. It's interesting, no one has said sustainability, that on-demand access to resources is more sustainable, is it not?
Sure.
Maria, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, if you access services on demand, it means two things. First of all, I'm just going to make a arrow to the previous question.
Yeah.
For me, network as a service or anything as a service doesn't mean it's actually offered only for self-serve purposes. Your customers won't be ready. They may not be for the end-to-end approach. So you can't just isolate and say, because it's as a service, self-serve is the option. You need to be able to assist them at the very least. And what they want is the optionality. Customers want optionality. And with that comes the sustainability options. Be able to break down your network or your services into components that you can better serve. It also means that you can better bundle them together. And customers, I mean, everybody has different customers, different experiences, but they will not be coming to us asking for a specific named service. They are expecting an outcome. And when you put on a service a label, you're constricting it. And if we do this right and we follow the componentization approach, you'll be able to stitch things together and name them something else for the customers. And there is a sustainability element to that, because you won't have to reinvent the same components that maybe are the foundation of a product that you use, or 10 products that you use now. So the sustainability element does come in. But also, of course, it's very important to understand that customers are at a different level of education and knowledge and expectation, and you need to be able to serve all of them.
So give them a choice. Morgan, I think you wanted to add something.
Absolutely. So one advantage to the kind of componentization of it is become really apparent to us recently in that we're working with service providers who have customers that also are customers of hyperscalers, and they're multinational corporations. And so the ability to think in terms of functionality, things like VPN and gateways, starts to become more complicated when the traffic path may be served in part by the service provider and in part by other service providers. So we've got to sit down and say, okay, for us to establish this multinational network, how do we think in terms of the functionality that's going to be homed by the service provider, but then ultimately fulfilled by other parties? And the only way you can do that is to start to break what had been like, this is my global MPLS network, into more basic functions.
Okay, so that componentization is a critical element for network as a service, benefits which are better integration in an ecosystem of partners, delivering cloud and other digital resources. For you, it's about customer choice, giving them choice in terms of interaction, correct? Better outcomes. And for you, it's better operations, better performance, and better security as well, right? Oh, and better resource utilization.
And faster innovation, and therefore customer benefit as well.
Okay. And from your perspective, if we focus just down on just the outcomes for end user customers, and by that, be it a consumer or an enterprise, but I'm imagining mostly enterprises, networks as a service means what specifically? What do you think is it more about the performance of their applications? Is it about predictability? What is it that they get?
First of all, it's richness of innovation if we have that as an external interface, right? Innovation will not depend solely on us, but external partners.
So it's a route to innovation. Okay, and for you, just to wrap up, networks as a service for your for Colt and for its customers.
Everything that we said combined, and the fact that every single organizational element in a company has to re-educate themselves from managing a budget to peaks that we've had in the past, changing that notion and how you do your budgets to actually, how you serve your customers. So it encompasses everything.
So you can't really thrive as a service provider without networks as a service. That's basically what you're saying. Okay, and Morgan, I think you might agree with that.
I agree. I mean, it's the ability to compose and expose services in a consistent way that folks have become accustomed to with the cloud providers.
And your number one piece of advice, each one of you, just briefly, so we wrap up. Morgan?
Work out the organizational and process kinks first, and then think about solving some of the technology problems.
Maria, your last best piece of advice?
Think about what your customers' problems are and try to solve them through technology later, but first through business processes.
Fantastic. And Mark?
Be passionate about the outcomes instead of focusing on the problems for the transformation.
Right. Well, I think we heard some passion today from this learned panel. Please give them a round of applause.